Now listen, come here. Come a little closer, because I need you to hear this with your heart, not just your ears. See, a lot of people think making someone miss you is about what you say. They think it's about texts, calls, explanations, speeches, begging, reminding, probing. But I came to tell you something today. The strongest message you will ever send is the one you don't say out loud. You don't make someone miss you by chasing them. You make them miss you by becoming unforgettable without trying. And today, I'm going to break that down for you. 7 keys that will change how you walk, how you think, and how you show up in the world. Not to control anybody, not to manipulate anybody, but to respect yourself so deeply that missing you becomes inevitable. Stop being the place he rests. Become the place he realizes he lost. Let me tell you something real, something people don't like to hear, because it requires honesty and self-respect. Too many people become a place of rest instead of a place of value. They become the soft landing, the emotional couch, the safe spot someone comes to when life gets heavy, confusing, or inconvenient. And listen, there is nothing wrong with being kind, supportive, loving, or patient. Those are beautiful qualities. But when those qualities are offered without boundaries, without balance, without expectation of respect, they stop being appreciated and start being consumed. When you are the place someone rests, you become predictable. You're always there. You always understand. You always forgive quickly. You always make room. And after a while, comfort replaces curiosity. Familiarity replaces effort. They don't miss what's always available. They don't value what never requires intention. Rest is necessary, but rest is not treasured. Nobody brags about the couch they sit on every day. They just expect it to be there. Now here's the shift. Becoming the place he realizes he lost doesn't mean becoming cold, cruel, or distant. It means becoming conscious of your worth. It means realizing that your presence is not just comfort. It is contribution. Your energy, your insight, your care, your encouragement, your laughter, your loyalty, those things have weight. And when they're given freely without limit, people stop recognizing their value. Loss is what teaches value. Absence is what teaches appreciation. When you stop being the place he rests, you stop absorbing everything without question. You stop being the emotional landing pad that cushions every fall while your own needs go unmet. You stop fixing problems that aren't yours to fix. You stop showing up automatically just because someone is used to you being there. And when you do that, something uncomfortable happens for them. They feel the space where you used to be. They feel the silence where your reassurance used to live. They feel the difference between having access to you and losing it. See, when someone rests on you, they don't reflect. They don't assess. They don't ask themselves hard questions. Why would they? Everything feels supported. But when that support is no longer automatic, reflection begins. And reflection is where realization lies. That's when someone starts replaying moments. That's when they notice what you brought to their life that they didn't replace. That's when they understand that your presence was not ordinary. It was essential. This is not about punishment. It's about positioning. You are not withdrawing to make someone hurt. You are withdrawing to protect what matters. Your peace, your energy, your dignity. You are choosing not to be drained in the name of being loved. And the truth is, people respect what costs them something. When your presence requires effort, intention, and consistency, it becomes meaningful. When you were the place he rested, your value was invisible because it was constant. When you become the place he realizes he lost, your value becomes undeniable because it's absent. He starts to recognize how much lighter his burdens felt when you listened, how much clearer things were when you spoke, how much calmer life was when you were around. Loss sharpens memory. Distance clarifies impact. And here's the part most people miss. This shift is more for you than for him. When you stop being the resting place, you reclaim your role as a person with standards, limits, and self-respect. You stop teaching people that you are available at the expense of yourself. You start teaching them that access to you is earned, not assumed. That lesson changes how people approach you, whether they come back or not. Because when someone realizes they lost you, it's not just about missing your presence. It's about recognizing the gap you filled, that no one else did the same way. It's about understanding that what they had was rare, and rare things don't stay where they are not protected. Your routine should not revolve around his attention. Let me be very clear about something that changes the entire dynamic between two people. The moment your daily life starts revolving around whether or not someone notices you, your power quietly slips away. Not because you are doing something wrong, not because you care too much, but because attention was never meant to be the center of your world. When your routine is built around waiting, checking, hoping, and adjusting for someone else's availability, you slowly teach them that your time is flexible, your priorities are negotiable, and your life can pause on command. And people don't miss what they believe will always wait for them. When your routine revolves around his attention, your energy becomes reactive instead of intentional. Your mood shifts based on a message, a call, a response, or a delay. Your plans become adjustable depending on whether he shows interest. Your joy starts to depend on validation instead of fulfillment. And while that may feel like connection, what it actually creates is imbalance. One person is living, the other is waiting. One person is choosing, the other is hoping to be chosen. That imbalance never creates longing, it creates comfort. And comfort, when it's one-sided, does not lead to being missed. People miss what disrupts their absence, not what rearranges itself around them. When your life is full, when you wake up with purpose, move with direction, and invest in things that grow you, you become someone whose presence matters. Not because you're busy for show, but because your life has momentum. Momentum is attracted. It signals self-respect. It says, I have a life that continues whether you are watching or not. And that message lands deeply, even when nothing is said out loud. When your routine no longer revolves around his attention, something important happens internally. You stop checking your phone as a source of worth. You stop postponing your happiness. You stop measuring your value by someone else's consistency. You begin to reconnect with yourself, the parts of you that had dreams, interests, goals, and rhythms before you started orbiting someone else. And as you reconnect with that version of yourself, your energy changes. You become calmer. You become steadier. You become less anxious about outcomes. That steadiness is felt. It's noticed. It's remembered. From the outside, it looks like confidence. From the inside, it feels like freedom. And freedom is magnetic. When someone realizes that your life is no longer structured around their attention, they feel the shift. Suddenly, they are no longer the center of your schedule. They are no longer the highlight of your day by default. They are no longer guaranteed access to your time and focus. That realization forces awareness. Awareness leads to curiosity. Curiosity leads to missing. This isn't about playing hard to get or pretending not to care. It's about being genuinely engaged in your own life. There is a difference between being unavailable as a tactic and being unavailable because your life is full. One is forced. The other is natural. And people can always feel the difference. When your routine is rich with meaning, work you care about, relationships that nourish you, habits that strengthen you, you don't have to announce anything. Your absence speaks for itself. When someone is used to being the reason you rearrange your day, they don't feel special. They feel expected. But when they realize your time is valuable, protected, and not easily shifted, their perspective changes. Now your presence requires intention. Now your availability feels earned. Now being with you feels like a choice instead of an assumption. And choices carry weight. Assumptions do not. There is also a deeper truth here that has nothing to do with anyone else. When your routine revolves around someone's attention, you abandon parts of yourself without realizing it. You delay your growth. You quiet your intuition. You minimize your needs. Over time, that creates resentment, even if you never say it out loud. Reclaiming your routine is not selfish. It's corrective. It restores balance. It reminds you that your life is not a waiting room. And here's what happens when balance returns. You show up differently. You speak differently. You listen without overextending. You care without over-attaching. You enjoy connection without depending on it. That version of you is not easily forgotten. That version leaves an impression. Because when someone realizes that your world does not revolve around them, but still had space for them, they understand the difference between being centered and being included. And being included in a full life is far more meaningful than being the only thing in an empty one. Energy changes before words ever do. One of the biggest mistakes people make is believing that change has to be announced. They think growth needs an explanation, that distance needs a conversation, that emotional shifts require a speech. But the truth is, long before anyone hears a word from you, they feel you. Energy speaks first. It always has. Before you say, I'm different now, your presence already tells the story. Before you explain that you've outgrown something, your silence already communicates it. Words are the final step. Energy is the beginning. When your energy changes, it shows up in subtle but powerful ways. You respond instead of react. You pause instead of panic. You no longer rush to fill silence with reassurance or over-clarification. Your emotions stop spilling out on demand. Not because you don't feel, but because you've learned to manage what you give and to whom. That shift is felt immediately. People may not be able to name it, but they sense it. Something feels different. Something feels quieter, steadier, less accessible. And that difference creates attention. Energy changes when you stop needing to be understood by someone who isn't listening. It changes when you stop explaining your feelings to someone who keeps dismissing them. It changes when you stop chasing emotional validation and start regulating yourself. You don't announce that you're done over giving. You simply stop doing it. And when that happens, the dynamic shifts. The person who is used to your emotional availability now feels the absence of it. Not in a dramatic way, but in a disorienting one. When your energy changes, you become less predictable. You're not cold, but you're not pouring everything out either. You're present, but not performing. Calm, but not empty. That balance is unsettling to people who were accustomed to reading you easily. They no longer know how much access they have. They don't know what you're thinking. They don't know how to trigger the same responses they used to. And uncertainty forces reflection. Reflection leads to replaying moments. Replay is where missing begins. Words can be ignored. Energy cannot. Someone can scroll past a message, dismiss an explanation, argue with a statement, but they cannot escape the feeling that something has shifted. When your energy is no longer anxious, no longer overly accommodating, no longer centered around their reactions, it disrupts their expectations. They notice you're not asking the same questions, not seeking the same reassurance, not offering the same emotional labor. And that absence becomes louder than any confrontation ever could. Energy also changes when you stop living in emotional urgency. When everything doesn't need to be resolved immediately. When every feeling doesn't need to be expressed instantly. When you give yourself space to process instead of rushing to connect, that grounded energy feels mature. It feels self-assured. It feels like someone who knows they'll be okay regardless of the outcome. And that kind of energy creates respect. Respect changes how people remember you. There's another layer to this that's important. When your energy changes, it's not just about how others perceive you. It's about how you experience yourself. You stop feeling drained after interactions. You stop feeling the need to recover from conversations. You stop feeling like you gave more than you received. That internal shift creates peace. And peace has a presence. People can feel when you're no longer internally chaotic. They can feel when you're no longer trying to hold everything together. That calm creates contrast. And contrast is memorable. People often say they want closure through words, but what actually lingers is behavior. When your energy changes and stays consistent, it becomes the message. No arguing, no blaming, no convincing. Just a steady, quiet difference. That difference forces others to fill in the blanks themselves. And when people have to interpret your silence, they tend to reflect more deeply than when you explain everything for them. Energy changes when you stop trying to be chosen and start choosing yourself. That decision alters how you sit in a room, how you listen, how you leave conversations. You don't lean in as hard. You don't chase connection. You allow it to meet you where you are. That grounded stance is powerful. It signals self-worth without saying a word. And self-worth, when it's real, is felt instantly. The most powerful part is this: once your energy changes, there's no going back to who you were without effort, because you've tasted peace. You've experienced what it feels like to hold yourself instead of waiting for someone else to do it. And that version of you leaves an imprint. Even if nothing is ever said, even if paths don't cross again, that energy lingers in memory. Because while words fade, energy is remembered. When you stop over-explaining, you start being remembered over. Explaining is one of the most misunderstood habits people develop when they care deeply. It often comes from a good place, a desire to be understood, to be fair, to make sure no one misreads your intentions. But over time, over-explaining becomes a quiet way of giving away your power. When you constantly justify your feelings, clarify your decisions, or defend your boundaries, you teach people that your truth needs their approval to exist. And once that happens, your presence becomes familiar, but not impactful. When you explain everything, there is no mystery left, no space, no pause for reflection. You answer questions no one asked. You soften statements that didn't need softening. You fill silence because it makes you uncomfortable. And in doing so, you remove the very thing that makes people think about you when you're not there. People don't remember what was fully spelled out for them. They remember what made them stop and reflect. Over-explaining often shows up when you feel emotionally responsible for how someone receives you. You want them to understand why you acted the way you did. You want them to see your heart. You want them to know you didn't mean harm. But the truth is, the people who are committed to understanding you don't need long explanations. They listen. And the people who consistently misunderstand, you often aren't confused. They're unwilling. Explaining more to them doesn't bring clarity. It brings exhaustion. When you stop over-explaining, you begin to trust your own authority. You trust that your feelings are valid without a supporting argument. You trust that your decisions don't require a defense team. You trust that no is complete without a paragraph attached to it. That trust changes how you show up. You become calmer, more concise, and that shift is noticeable. Silence, when it comes from self-respect, is not empty. It's full. It carries confidence. It says, I don't need to convince you. And that is powerful. People are not used to that. They are used to reactions, to emotional bargaining, to explanations that invite debate. When you remove that pattern, the dynamic changes. Now they have to sit with their own thoughts. Now they have to interpret your absence of explanation. And interpretation leads to memory. When you stop explaining, people start replaying. They revisit conversations. They analyze your tone. They question their assumptions. They wonder why you didn't argue harder or plead your case. That wondering stays with them longer than any explanation ever could, because when you explain, you give them closure. When you don't, you give them something to think about. Over-explaining also keeps you emotionally available in ways that drain you. It invites people into your internal process when they haven't earned that access. It turns private decisions into public discussions. When you stop doing that, you protect your inner world. You decide who gets clarity and who gets distance. That boundary doesn't make you cold. It makes you intentional, and intentional people leave impressions. There is also dignity and restraint. When you don't rush to explain yourself, you communicate confidence without saying it. You show that you're secure enough to let your actions stand on their own. That security is rare. It's memorable. People remember how you made them feel when you didn't scramble for understanding. They remember the calm. They remember the composure. They remember the strength. When you stop over-explaining, you also stop over-sharing. You no longer give people emotional material they can misinterpret. You choose clarity over justification. You choose peace over persuasion. That choice changes how people relate to you. Some may feel uncomfortable because they were used to having access to every thought and feeling. Others may feel respect because they recognize the boundary. Either way, you are no longer invisible. Being remembered isn't about being loud. It's about being grounded. It's about knowing when words add value and when they dilute it. When you stop explaining everything, your words gain weight. When you do speak, people listen more closely because they know you don't speak just to fill space. Your voice becomes intentional. Your silence becomes meaningful. And here's the quiet truth, the version of you that doesn't over-explain is the version that stays in people's minds. Because that version isn't trying to be understood. That version understands themselves. And self-understanding creates a presence that doesn't need explanation. Growth makes people feel left behind. Growth has a quiet power that no argument, explanation, or announcement can compete with. When you grow, you don't have to say you've changed. People can see it, feel it, and sense it in the way you move through life. And one of the most uncomfortable truths about growth is this: it doesn't just elevate you, it exposes stagnation in others. When you evolve and someone else stays the same, the distance between you becomes undeniable. That distance is often where missing begins. When you start growing, your priorities shift. You become more intentional with your time, your energy, and your emotions. You no longer tolerate what once drained you. You don't linger in situations that limit you. You invest in yourself, your mindset, your skills, your peace, your future. None of this is loud. None of it needs an audience. But it changes you from the inside out. And when someone who once had close access to you sees that transformation happening without them, it creates a feeling they may not know how to name. Growth creates contrast. You start responding instead of reacting. You stop repeating the same conversations. You stop revisiting the same problems. Your focus shifts forward. And for someone who was used to meeting you in an old version of yourself, that contrast can feel like loss. They remember who you used to be with them, how accessible you were, how much you poured in. When that version no longer exists, they begin to feel left behind, not because you abandoned them, but because you outgrew the space you were in. This is where growth becomes unforgettable. People don't miss who you say you are becoming. They miss the access they once had to who you were. When you level up emotionally, mentally, or spiritually, you take your energy with you. You no longer operate from insecurity or need. You no longer wait for permission to evolve. And when someone realizes they are no longer part of that evolution, it hits differently. They're not just missing your presence. They're missing the version of life they imagined with you still in it. Growth also changes how you engage. You listen more carefully. You speak with clarity. You choose your words instead of flooding conversations with emotion. You don't argue to be understood. You don't force connection. That maturity can feel intimidating to someone who hasn't done the same inner work. It reminds them of what they haven't faced, healed, or changed. And that reminder lingers long after you're gone. What makes growth so powerful is that it doesn't seek validation. You're not proving anything. You're not trying to make anyone regret their choices. You're simply becoming more aligned with yourself. That alignment is visible. It shows in your confidence, your boundaries, your calm. And when someone sees you standing firmly in who you are, especially if they remember when you weren't, it reshapes how they remember you. Growth rewrites the story in their mind. There's also a subtle grief that comes with watching someone grow without you. It's the realization that time moved forward and you didn't move with it. That realization doesn't always turn into action, but often turns into reflection. People start asking themselves questions they avoided before. They replay moments. They compare then and now. And in that comparison, they feel the weight of what they lost. Not because you left loudly, but because you left quietly and became more. Growth doesn't wait for readiness. It happens when you decide you can't stay where you are anymore. And when you choose growth, you choose change, even if it costs familiarity. Some people won't follow you. Some won't understand you, but they will notice you. And noticing turns into remembering. Remembering turns into missing. The hardest part for others is that growth doesn't argue. It doesn't explain itself, it just keeps moving. And when someone realizes they're standing in the same place while you've gone ahead, the space between you becomes meaningful. That space tells a story words never could. It says you didn't just move on, you moved up. Growth makes people feel left behind because it reminds them that staying the same was a choice. And when they see you thriving, grounded, and evolving without resentment or bitterness, that truth becomes impossible to ignore. They don't just miss you. They miss the opportunity to grow with you. You don't chase closure. You become it. Chasing closure is one of the most common ways people stay emotionally stuck. They believe that if they can just have one more conversation, one more explanation, one more honest moment, everything will finally make sense. But the truth is, closure is rarely something someone else gives you. Most of the time, closure is something you create through how you choose to move forward. When you stop chasing answers from people who are no longer aligned with you, you begin to reclaim your power. Closure is often misunderstood as clarity through conversation. People think it comes from hearing the right words, receiving an apology, or getting confirmation that their feelings were valid. But real closure doesn't come from dialogue. It comes from acceptance. It comes from recognizing what someone showed you through their actions and deciding that you no longer need them to explain it. When you stop asking why and start accepting what is, you begin to close the chapter yourself. When you chase closure, you keep emotional doors open that should already be closed. You revisit memories. You replay conversations. You analyze tone, timing, and intention. And in doing so, you keep yourself tied to a moment that has already passed. Becoming closure means choosing not to revisit what no longer serves you. It means letting behavior be the explanation and silence be the final answer. That choice doesn't come from bitterness. It comes from maturity. Becoming closure looks like moving with grace instead of resentment. It's not about disappearing angrily or cutting someone off dramatically. It's about stepping back calmly and letting your actions reflect your decision. You don't chase understanding. You don't demand accountability. You don't force emotional resolution. You simply live in a way that shows you've accepted the truth of the situation. That quiet resolve is powerful and it's unforgettable. When you stop chasing closure, people feel it. They sense that you're no longer waiting for something from them. You're not looking for reassurance. You're not hoping for a message that explains everything. That shift creates distance, and distance invites reflection. They begin to realize there's nothing left to fix, nothing left to debate, nothing left to control. All that remains is the reality of your absence and the memory of how you handled it. Becoming closure also means choosing dignity over explanation. You don't need to announce that you're done. You don't need to justify why you've stepped away. Your consistency does the talking. You show closure by not reopening wounds, not revisiting arguments, and not seeking validation from the same source that disappointed you. That self-respect leaves a lasting impression. People remember how you didn't beg, didn't lash out, didn't fall apart publicly. They remember the strength in your restraint. There is also peace in becoming closure. When you stop chasing answers, you stop reopening emotional wounds. You stop putting your healing in someone else's hands. You realize that understanding every detail is not required to move forward. Sometimes not knowing everything is what allows you to finally let go. Closure becomes less about explanation and more about alignment with yourself, your values, and your future. When someone sees that you've moved on without bitterness, without dramatics, without needing their participation, it forces them to sit with their own thoughts. They may wonder why you didn't fight harder for answers. They may question why you didn't demand closure the way they expected. And that questioning lingers. Because when you don't chase closure, you leave behind a sense of finality that words could never create. Becoming closure also teaches you an important lesson about self-trust. You learn to trust your interpretation of events. You trust what you felt. You trust what you observed. You no longer need someone else to confirm your experience. That trust strengthens you. It allows you to move forward without dragging the past with you. And that forward movement is visible. It's felt. It changes how people remember you. The most powerful form of closure is living well without needing to explain how you got there. It's choosing growth instead of rumination, peace instead of proof, distance instead of debate. When you become closure, you don't just end a chapter, you close it with integrity. And that integrity becomes the lasting memory. The right man misses you. The wrong man misses control. There is a critical difference between being missed for who you are and being missed for what you provided. And understanding that difference changes how you see everything. When the right man misses you, he misses your presence, your spirit, your contribution to his life. When the wrong man misses you, he misses the access, the convenience, the emotional labor, and the control he once had. Those two experiences can feel similar on the surface, but they come from very different places. The right man misses you in a way that leads to reflection. He thinks about how you made his life better, not easier at your expense, but richer in meaning. He remembers your consistency, your support, your perspective, and your care. Missing you makes him evaluate himself. It causes growth. It invites accountability. It doesn't come with entitlement. It comes with respect. He understands that your absence is a consequence, not a tactic. And he honors that space even when it's uncomfortable. The wrong man, however, doesn't miss your essence. He misses what he lost control over. He misses your availability, your emotional responsiveness, your willingness to adjust yourself around his needs. What he feels is disruption, not loss. The routines he relied on are gone. The reassurance he took for granted is no longer accessible. The power dynamic has shifted, and that shift unsettles him. What he calls missing you is often just discomfort with no longer being centered. This distinction becomes clear when you stop overgiving, when you stop fixing, soothing, and carrying emotional weight that was never yours to begin with. The reaction you get tells you everything. The right man notices the absence and looks inward. The wrong man notices the absence and looks outward, often trying to pull you back into the same dynamic without addressing what caused the distance. One seeks reconnection through growth. The other seeks restoration of control. Control often hides behind familiarity. When someone is used to you being emotionally available on demand, they mistake that access for connection. When that access is removed, they feel exposed. They may reach out not to understand you, but to see if they still have influence. They may test boundaries, provoke responses, or attempt to reinsert themselves without changing anything meaningful. That behavior isn't about missing you. It's about missing dominance over the dynamic. The right man doesn't rush your return. He doesn't pressure you to explain yourself or justify your distance. He respects your boundaries even when he doesn't like them. He understands that connection without respect isn't connection at all. His missing you is quiet, thoughtful, and patient. It shows up in changed behavior, not empty words. He knows that access to you is not automatic and never was. The wrong man often confuses silence with challenge. He may escalate his efforts when he realizes you're no longer responsive. He may suddenly become attentive, curious, or emotional, not because he's grown, but because he feels his influence slipping. This kind of attention is reactive, not intentional. It fades once control is reestablished. And if you've experienced that cycle before, you recognize how draining it is. Understanding this difference protects you from mistaking attention for intention. Not every message means someone misses you for the right reasons. Not every attempt to reconnect is rooted in respect. When you hold firm to your boundaries, You give people the space to reveal their true motivations. The right man rises to the occasion. The wrong man resists it. This is why self-respect changes everything. When you stop shrinking to maintain connection, you naturally filter who belongs in your life. You stop responding to urgency and start responding to consistency. You stop being impressed by words and start watching behavior. That clarity makes it impossible for control to disguise itself as care. Being missed by the right man feels affirming but not consuming. It doesn't pull you back into chaos or confusion. It doesn't require you to abandon your peace. Being missed by the wrong man feels heavy, tense, and unsettling. It comes with pressure, guilt, or manipulation. Learning to tell the difference is a form of emotional maturity that saves you from repeating old patterns. When you step fully into your worth, you no longer chase being missed. You observe who responds with growth and who responds with resistance. And that response tells you everything you need to know.